Hello, my name is Brant Hunt, and today is what is it? January the 9th, I think it is, 2024. And I'm going to be reading a particular book called The Stable and the Manger by Alvin Kuhn. I wish I'd had this book a little bit earlier. It could be a part of what I call a Christmas show, so to speak. But yes, I want to read this particular book and want to share it with others. Hopefully, we'll do some others in the near future, probably to do with, well, I see about Halloween, another one that most people are not aware of. But let's get into this particular book here as I get ready to record here and do this thing today. So, again, the title is The Stable and the Manger by Alvin Kuhn. So Hannah conceived at the turn of the year, she bore a son. 1 Samuel 1:20. And at midnight there was a cry made, Behold, the bridegroom cometh. Matthew 25:6. And many people claim this whole thing, which Matthew 25:6 is about the coming of Jesus. That's what many are told, so to speak. And Silent Night, Holy Night, all is calm, all is bright. Franz Gruber. This book was written in 1936. Again, the title is Stable and the Manger. What significance it may be to modern Christianity to be confronted with the evidence that it has never known the inner meaning of its own Bible must be determined in the near future by the historical sequel. That such a bold assertion can be made and supported is hardly less astonishing than will be the revelation of the hitto unknown meaning of the Christmas story in the Gospels of the New Testament. The mind of the student, awakened by the disclosure of a recognized sense in this particular portion of Scripture, will speculate and wonder as to how completely the true significance of other fundamental structures in the Bible and theology may likewise have been missed. Nor can considerations fail to be given to the general implications of such a revelation, in particular to the ludicrousness of a situation involving nearly half the world, and that half vaunting its superiority in intelligence, and the blight of being found utterly ignorant of the meaning of the book, which for 16 centuries has stood as its spiritual light and guide, the spectacle of civilization dominated for long ages by a volume, the vital message of which is now shown never to have been interpreted at all, must strike the mind of all thoughtful persons with reflections of the most challenging nature. How orthodox exegesis missed the true import of its own scripture, how its reverend Bibles could wield the influence of social humanization claimed for it when it was never basely understood, how the stream of Western history may have been polluted by the coloration of a false rendering, and how the coming epoch may be affected by the recovery of priceless wisdom so long obscured. Obscure means simply hidden. Must be the themes of earlier conjugate in the wake of the interpretations advanced in this and other lectures in the series. The fact that the Christmas scenario has numberless times been enacted in the churches of Christendom will not, with not a soul ever dreaming of its cosmic and radical reference, should lay heavy siege to the citadel of orthodox complacency. The abortion of primitive wisdom in Christian scripture is easily traceable through the developments of history to its perceptible causes. It came as a result of the decay of esoteric study from the 3rd century forward, and the committed ignorance as to the specialized methodology employed by the ancients in sacred writing. In archaic times, knowledge was put forth in strange language indeed. It was not written in plain terms to be most directly apprehended. It was embodied in a form that would at once conceal and reveal its meaning. For it was meant to be grasped by one group of people, the initiative, and missed by another, the uninstructed. So this was all done on purpose, folks. This is the way it is. This is why the whole not not an esoteric perspective, but an exoteric perspective has blinded people immensely. And again, like I shared yesterday with Tony Bushby's work, and there's other works by D.M. Murdoch claiming that was no Jesus. Well, of course, there was no Jesus. You see, it's a story. You see, this is from this here. He's just basically simply saying simply is that there was no Jesus, not Jesus, but this he's looking at it literal. He's knocked out one piece of the brick, so to speak, understood it, but he hasn't figured out simply it's esoteric. It's a story, has spiritual significance for people. You see. Therefore, it was worked over into forms of cryptic symbolism, for the interpretation of which certain keys were requisites. It was elaborate into myth, allegory, parable, and fable, legend, astrological depreciation, and even numerological figurations. Paul declares the Abraham story in the Old Testament to be allegory. Of course it is. That's what it is. The most intelligent parties in the Christian church for some 2.5 centuries took the entire Bible as allegory. Many schools, sects, and brotherhoods, both before and after the beginning of the Christian era, studied biblical writings as parables of man's spiritual life. Notably among these groups were the Essenes, about whom we take this sentence from the Encyclopedia Britannica in an article under their name called "The Sacred Books Were Preserved and Read with Great Reverence, though not without a allegorical interpretation." End quote. A mass of further evidence could be adduced to confirm the claim in this respect. This recondite mechanology of the ancient scriptural poets has caught and deceived modern scholarship, but when taken as a factual occurrence and objective history, the fabulous representation of ancient books appears ridiculous, in spite of the fact that zealous pietism from the 3rd century forward strove to make its conversion of myth into history as possible. Modern estimates of ancient intelligence has been based on the view that the writers of the old books believed in their myths as verical fact. Do we not have the secret here of the modern opinions of ancient intelligence? It has been assumed that antiquity was so childish as to believe its own myths. But the childishness is all on our part for such a baseless ascription. These seers and sages of an earlier age were more deeply instructed in the profound truths of our life than we yet are. But they consigned their wisdom to books, when it was entrusted to writing at all, under the forms of a disguise. And not in 16 centuries has the Western mind been astute enough to penetrate this veil and unmask the marvels of truth and knowledge lying beneath. Right here is found the reason why Christian theology has failed to solve the Kabbalistic enigma of the meaning of its own doctrinal material, or it approaches ancient archaic literature with a preconception of its errant inferiority, which precluded the imputation to it a merit of profundity, nor did it rest until it had reduced the body of arcane writing to variable nonsense, forcing upon the myths and upon their subtle devisers a alleged sense that was a frightful travesty of their true but hidden connotation. And it is easily demonstrable that certain weird manifestations cropping out in the life of medieval Christendom and having repercussions down to this present were engendered as the outcome of the general obfuscation of Western mentality by the perversion of its heritage of spiritual wisdom to a jargon of incomprehensible theological absurdities. Humanity is sensitive to the lightest breeze of philosophy. Nothing rules the world so decisively as ideas. Corrupted truth must exact its grave toll of befuddlement and misery. The magnificent old wisdom was lost to medieval life, save only where surreptitiously nourished by secret esoteric movements of one type or another. The world was forced to struggle on amidst spiritual shoals and quicksands, deprived of the true light of knowledge that met life's problems. Mankind has been starving for long centuries. It is almost strangling for want of it now. The religion that should have been our sustaining power has been made repellent to intellect and almost equally disappointing to piety. History has practically discredited the manual of faith. The institutions, the institutions, the institution of religion is in a sorry case, being held in contempt or treated with indifference by more than 60% of Western people. The youth of the age is in outspoken revolt against its claims to their loyalty. As a result, our very culture is in jeopardy. Religion is vital to culture, you see. The Bible is still revered as the Word of God. Holy Writ holds a place of influence only because of the traditions of its sanctity and authority, but with a grip seriously weakened by the onslaught of a discerning scholarly criticism. To this student enlightened by a true rendering of the meaning of the myths, the expositions of unwittingly asininity made by the efforts of medieval and modern Christian exegetists to interpret their own scripture in a sorry one indeed. For the most part, such exegesis is nothing but a wretched caricature of the ideas hidden behind the mask. Our undertaking in this lecture should make evidence how utterly they have missed the profound sense and reverence of it. They have not even brought the meaning into the same world to which it properly applies, but they have kept it upon the plane of external objectivity as history, when it was designed to bear upon man's interior subjective spiritual experience only. Bible stories are in no sense a record of what happened to a man or a people as historical occurrence. As such, they would have little significance for mankind. They would be the they would be the experience of people, not ourselves, and would not bear a relation to our life. But they are a record under pictorial forms of that which is ever occurring as a reality of the presence in all lives. They mean nothing as outward events, but they mean everything as picturizations of that which is our living experience at all times. The actors are not old kings, priests, and warriors. The one actor in every portrait, in every scene, is the human soul. The Bible is the drama of our history here and now, and it is not apprehended in its full force and applicability until every reader discerns himself to be the central figure in it. The Bible is about the mystery of human life instead of relating to the incidents of a remote epoch in temporal history. It deals with the reality of the living presence in the life of every soul on earth. How widely it has been wrestled away from this primary relevance and turned over into the domain of inconsequentially personally or national history will perhaps be vividly seen as the original significance it brought to life. A new renaissance of human enlightenment may be the happy consequences of the rehabilitation of the structural integrity of the Bibles of sages' antiquity. It is confidently believed that this lecture will go far to vindicate these statements. It should demonstrate that the Bible material is allegory. It should disclose the unsuspecting profundity and sublimity of Bible meaning, rebuking the literalists and the skeptics as well. It should establish the recognition that the Bible is a collection of ancient texts embodying for more important wisdom and data, and dealing with a more fundamental cosmic and human science than ever the church has known. The lecture should in itself furnish a measure of clear insight into the methodology of Bible construction and give hints as to the techniques of interpretation. A brief passage from Plutarch will serve well to introduce the exposition. Now, Plutarch is spelled Plutarch, and Plutarch was one who basically has written a lot to do with the Greek scholars. Quote, but in his, quote, Plato's book of laws, when he was now grown old, he affirmed, not in riddles and imbroils, but in plain and proper words, that the world is not moved by one soul, but perhaps by a great many. but not by fewer than two, the one of which is beneficent, and the other contrary to it, and the author of things contrary. He also leaves a certain third nature in the midst between, which is neither without soul, nor without reason, nor void of self-moving power, but rests upon both of the preceding principles, but yet so as to affect, desire, and pursuit the better of them. Quote, end quote. We have quoted this statement to link our preceding material with what follows, for incidentally, Plutarch first confirms our assertions as to the cryptic character of ancient religious and philosophical writings. He testifies to the fact of Plato's having used until late in life the methodology of writing, quote, in riddles and embroils, end quote. Then he proceeds to lay down in the simplest of words the basic formula of the nature and constitution of man on which our exegesis rests. He says that our nature is comprised of two opposing principles, mediated by a third. Man is compounded of two elements, which are spirit and matter. Man consists of soul and body, spiritually consciousness, and a physical vehicle. Between the two stands the conscious mind sharing, as Plutarch intimates, the capabilities of both the superconscious soul and the subconscious soul of the body. This mind being the principle called manas, M-A-N-A-S in Sanskrit, is the mediator between the God, or higher self in man, and a lower sensual life. The priest as intercessory between God, that is properly not God, it's a little g, and animal, man in all religions, and typo of this bridge of intercommunication in human nature. For in Rome, the emperor, as head of the national religion, was the Pontifex Maximus, or chief, quote, bridge builder, end quote. Plato analysis, human nature as compounded of dianoia, that's D-I-A-N-O-I-A, or dianoia consciousness, the high spirit, and dos, D-O-S-X-A, or sense as the upper and lower constitutions, not constitutions, sorry, constitutions. Paul classes the two as the carnal mind of the creature and the spiritual mind of the indwelling deity. Between the two natures, from the beginning of the community of interest in the human being, and for the continuation of it until the final amalgamation of the two in one new man. In other words, bringing the two together. End quote. In place of the two in one new man. Quote. There is intimacy, according to Paul. A reconciliation is finally effected through the mediatorial offices of the Christ, the high priest after the order of Melchizedek, that is, the king of righteousness, as, quote, the summits of secondary nature are most proximate to the basis of superior orders, end quote. To use the quaint phrases of Proclus in Thomas Taylor's translation, we find here at last the ground for an understanding of the biblical figuration of the mutual bruising of head and heel and in Genesis myth. Yeah, I've always wondered what that meant. So, the bruising would take place at the point of contact, where the lower portion of the upper man would come into friction with the highest position of the lower. Okay? So there's like a rubbing. Okay? Point of contact here. The warfare between soul and sense would be fought on the borderline between the two natures in man. And precisely there is where the Egyptian books state that the great, in quote, spiritual battle of Armageddon is fought on the horizon. The line between heaven and earth, or spirit and matter. So there it is. Right there, he just says something here. It kind of stands out here. The battle Armageddon. People think this is a physical thing that's going to take place between Russia and America. Nope, not exactly. So it's a line between heaven and earth, or spirit and matter. Precisely on this immediate line, sharing the proclivities of the lower and the capabilities of the upper, the cultivation, quote, cultivation, the crops on both sides of the horizon, end quote. Then a quote here, not a quote, but in a parentheses, Book of the Dead stands the conscious mind of the human. This is the soul in man. It is not the highest spirit, but it is the ray or fragment of that spirit that is projected downward and linked with the animal sensorium and the thinking mind. It is the Christ that is crucified on the cross of matter in us, being the resultant of the energies of spirit unified with those of sense. It becomes the, quote, one new man, end quote, of St. Paul's description, born of the wedlock of the two. It is thus born out of the blending of the two natures in man. It is the Christ coming to his new birth in our experience and in our nature. Paul states that he groans and travels with the Christians until, quote, Christ be formed within you, end quote. Our life of combined spirit and flesh on earth is to give birth to the Christ consciousness in us. This is the radical fundamentalism. This is the radical fundamentalism in all religion. This Christ selfhood in us is generated by the friction between the two natures. It is born out of the struggle between soul and body. It is engendered by the tension between the two poles of being, positive and negative, or spirit and matter, in the constitution of man. This transaction is the outcome of an operative principle in our lives that is of greater weight than it has been suspected in philosophy. It was the Greek philosopher Herodias who announced his place in the scheme of life in the clearest terms. He wrote, quote, war is the father of all things, end quote. All things are the resultant of the struggle of two opposing forces, which are everywhere ultimately spirit and matter. At the point of conflict between the two values are brought to conscious recognition. Life itself becomes conscious only on the horizon line between these two elements. It is the function of matter to bring spirit to awareness of itself. Spirit is consciousness, but it is not self-consciousness until, by the mystery of life, it is made aware of itself by material limitations. In humanity, the Christ nature is to be made conscious of its own divine selfhood. It is to be brought by human experience from merely potential divinity to divinity actualized, that is, made aware of its deified being. It is the struggle to inform matter with its living energies, the struggle against the inertia of matter that calls forth the latent faculties of spirit to self-recognition. Matter causes soul to exert its unused power and so evolves them through exercise. Thus spirit comes to know itself. To bring the two factors into relation to each other on a basis of affection, reciprocity, evolution had to equate their forces as to the two opposite poles in the life of man. It has to establish them in a condition of stable equilibrium. With this fact in mind, can we fail to thrill with wonder at the sagacity and knowledge of the ancient Egyptians when we find them describing our phase of life on earth as the, quote, the pool of equipoise, end quote. But no less should be our wonder at the wisdom that devised the zodiac, or the sign of Libra, the scales, was introduced for the purpose of depicting our life here as being a weighing in the scales of the balance. Remember, that's the whole thing about the weighing of your heart. But theology has never told us positively that the two pans of the balance are spirit and matter, nor has it impressed us with the highest suggestion of philosophy that our destinies are being hourly determined by the preponderance of spirituality or sensuality in our makeups. On the horizontal line of our lives, spirit and matter are established in equilibration, says Herligus. The world, quote, this is quote, the world is an invisible harmony, divided into itself and again united. This is a reference to the great law which ultimately unites the two forces in manifestation and separates them in dissolution or death when both retire into a state of inanition called in the East pralaya. That's Pralaya. The philosopher declares that life shows antithesis everywhere. Quote, the harmonious structure of the world depends upon opposite tension, like that of the bow and the lyre, end quote. Stability, or what appears such to us, is gained by nature only by the mutual annulment of two contrary powers. Are not the stars held in their fixed courses at the point where centripetal and centrifugal energies exactly countervail? An atom, the stable ingredient of matter, is itself the fixation of energy at a given locale as a result of opposing positive and negative electricities. Is it the law? Quote, in his present state, man has a divided existence, the life of the soul or the fire of reason, and the life of the senses of the imprisoning body, end quote. And to show that the two were conjoined in man, Hercules has told us that, quote, man is a portion of cosmic fire, imprisoned in a body of earth and water, end quote. The prometheon, that is, fire of soul, is linked by chemical affinities with the watery nature of the body. Our own Emerson has voiced this esoteric knowledge in the passage called, quote, man stands at this point betwixt the inner spirit and the outer matter, end quote. All values in life on any plane are born as a result of the union of male and female natures, be it in physics, chemistry, psychology, or spiritual love. Knowledge itself is born of the union of the subject and object in the equation. Know, K-N-O-W, in parentheses, comes from the Egyptian Ankh, A-N-K-H, meaning life and tie. Hence, knowing is an act involving the tying together of two things, subject and object, in a living relation. Again, there is a birth at the borderline where spirit or conscious subject and matter of known object meet in equipoise. A poet has said that heaven, quote, heaven and earth have kissed each other, end quote. And he might have gone further and said that they had wooed one and marry each other in the body and mind of man. The Holy Spirit and the Virgin Maria, that is in matter, came together to give birth to the Christos. This is all that the legend of Joseph and Mary could ever possibly have meant in scriptural allegory. But Joseph is the original Egyptian-Hebrew name for the divine counterpart, and Mary is the personification of the universal mother, matter. So these are not physical people here, you see. They're representing two counterparts here. They're one's speaking of the divine counterpart, that is Joseph, and then Mary is the personification of the universal mother, matter. Matter, which is what mother means, matter. That's what mother means in a lot of ways, matter. And man is supposed to be representing spirit. Matter ever has mothered the rebirth of spiritual consciousness. This is the function of matter as mother. Quote, mother being mater, M-A-T-E-R in Latin, to which Paul refers when he says, quote, for the whole creation groaneth and travaileth in pain until now, end quote, laboring to bring forth, quote, the sons of God. That's us, end quote, who are elsewhere, quote, the sons of mine, end quote. The Christly principle of intellect was being gestated in the womb of Mother Nature, and the evolutionary office of matter was to bring it to the birth in the fullness of time. Nature, which has created the animal, was next to create man. The human, whose mark of differentiation from the beast was the faculty of mind. You see what he's saying? The body itself is the beast, and the faculty of mind is basically the way from that. You see, this is how you spring yourself and get yourself free from the body, so to speak. You see, or you can actually seduce that self and not do that. You see, the wedding of the two cosmic elements and the birth of their son, the Christos, could take place only where the two parents could have vital communion with each other. It could therefore occur only where spirit could impregnate matter with its viral power, only where it could where it could stamp its lit image upon plastic substance. This opportunity was provided by life only at one place on this planet, that is in the physical body of man. Only here do soul and flesh have effective intercourse, for only here is there the condition of exact equilation demanded. It may safely be assumed that if spirit and matter are equally balanced in relation to each other, it must be at point to the gamut of being midway between the spiritual summit and the material base of the order of life. Sure enough, it is found in the middle of the fourth plane from the bottom. Life has projected its energies outward and downward from its heart, built up the body of matter, and then lifted itself up through three kingdoms, they being the mineral, the vegetable, and the animal, and prepared the fleshly habitation for mankind in the middle of the fourth plane, the energies latent in matter, in their rise through the kingdoms. Sorry about that. I'll try to show you something if I can find it. Yeah, this is, I'll show you this here. This is some Phil Langdon's book here. He calls it the Seven Kingdoms. And it'll be on, well, it's not showing what I want to show. So, but it basically is starting from what you call the minerals and then moving up to the vegetable and to the animal and prepare the fleshly habitation for mankind in the middle of the fourth plane, the energies latent in matter. And their rise through the kingdoms were met by the wave of a new imagination, imagine a spirit descending from the peak. The rationale of this procedure on the part of life is complex and involved. Suffice to say for the moment that obviously if a higher and lower force are to meet and unite at the point midway between their status of being, they must so meet at the result of the ascent of the one and the descent of the other. So one must move downward and the other one must move upward. So naturally, I would think simply is the spirit part would be the one would move downward and the body would move up. Nature could not well arrange such a meaning in any other way. That nature has so arranged the matter in one of the bits of knowledge furnished us by the ancient wisdom, when God or life at the beginning of each period in its activity bifurcates into the polarization of spirit and matter. The two forms of being more move towards each other, meet in the middle ground, or to say, affect their conjunction and interplay, and at the end of the cycle retire into the latency again. For the earth for the earth's evolution, that point of middle distance between the two is the body and the life of man. Here's where the marriage takes place and the son, the Christ, is born. And when the two forces meet at this point, they counteract each other energies and bring each other to a standstill. Spirit descending came to a stop in the arms of matter, for the inertia of matter stilled the vibrations of spirit. Likewise, matter ascending came to a pause in the arms of spirit. The two found themselves interlocked in each other's arms. Their forces exactly counterbalanced, they neutralized their opposing powers, and each found itself at a stand. It is necessary to stand here that life energy, which formed matter, had descended as far down as the first, that is, counting from below, or mental plane. But since neither the mental, sorry, but since neither the mineral nor the vegetable nor the animal forms could furnish the principles of mind or spirit a fit vehicle of expression of its higher type of life, this principle of combining intelligence and spirituality could descend only as far as the human or the fourth kingdom. The nadir, Nadir, point of the cycle of purely material force is therefore the material kingdom, while the nadir of mind and spirit is the human kingdom. The energy of physics or nature has descended as far as the mineral kingdom, reversed its direction there, and returned on its ascent through the three lower planes and a part of the fourth. Here it was met by the descending current of soul force seeking embodiment. Souls can go no lower than the human estate. Physical energy turned to return at the lowest of seven planes. Spiritual energy turned to return at the fourth is a series of seven, which is the human. The physical power had organized matter as a substance. Into organic forms of the mineral, the vegetable, and the animal beings. The highest animal forms were to become the embodiment of the spiritus that would place them in the category of humans. This incarnation was affected at the locus, LOCUS, where the two currents had become entangled in each other's grasp. For here was the situation demanded by Hercules' theorem of the war of opposing powers in life. This quote, this pool of equipoise, end quote, came in the plane occupied by man. Life eternally swings through the rounds of great cycles. It comes into and goes out of manifestation or embodiment in material form in an endless periodicity. It follows as an everlasting rhythm. It swings downward through the grades of being from pure spirituality to dense materially and back again when spiritual force is overcome by the density of the matter which it ensouls. Its outgoing is checked. It has started at pure spiritual impulses. It ends when its energies become crystallized in material form. It has been turned, as it were, from spirit into matter, where matter has caught and fixed the impulse in stable form. On its downward arc, the wave loses characteristic as spirit to win definition as matter. The light of spirit has been dimmed and almost extinguished by the darkness of matter. Spirit is then buried deepest in the night of material obscuration. At the lowest point of its enfeeblement, it could be said to stand at the winter solstice of the evolutionary year. So we just experienced the winter solstice, the 21st day of December, roughly a couple of weeks ago. The point of importance is that during the solistic period, when the two forces are holding each other in a condition of equilibration, we have just those cosmic and evolutionary conditions requisite for the birth and growth of the soul, that is, the Christ. The Messiah is born in the winter or material solace of evolution in the pool or point of stagnation. For here the soul is weighed and tested in the opposing value of spirit and matter, the scales of the cosmic balance. This is one of those great truths which were lost when the mystic schools, or not mystic, mystery schools, the temples and the Platonic academics were summarily closed by fanaticism bred of ignorance. It is a great truth essentially for the interpretation of the nativity symbolism. The Christ would be born at the December solstice or the Christmas time of evolution. He would come to life, be quickened from his apparent death and matter, just when the two arms of the balance are posed in equilibrium, in the wintry death of the soul and matter. So you see, this is all important, you see, during the solstice of the Christmas time. He would come to life, be quickened from the apparent death and matter, so the matter, so to speak. So you see this is important, even the time phase, so to speak. All this cosmic procedure was seen by the ancients to be typed by the apparent round of the sun through the solar year. It must be understood that these earth myth makers regarded the great, quote, Lord of Day as at once the essence, the embodiment, and the symbol of deity. The sun, S-U-N, is the Christos of the planetary system, as the soul is the Christos of the individual life. The soul itself of kindred essence with the sun. The intellectual soul is the sun in man. Proclus gives us one of the mightiest items of knowledge we can possess when he says, quote, the light of the sun, S-U-N, is the pure energy of intellect, end quote. The human soul is a further extended and therefore diminished ray of the same deified life that burns at the unimaginable radiance of solar glory. And not only is there this identity of nature between sun and soul, but the cyclical evolution or cycle of evolution of the one is an exact miniature of duplication of that of the other. The sun in its apparent passage from the high glory of summer to its feeble power and the solstice of winter exactly symbolizes, because it repeats the experience of the soul in its alternate saving from the heights of spiritual purity and disembodiment is summer to the depths of diminished shining in the lowest arc of the immersion in a body. It's night, it's winter, it's in the parallel, the time that the sun, S-U-N, is in the winter solstice, when for some 2 weeks it is held unchangeable in the grip of darkness, exactly corresponding to the period in the evolutionary arc when spirit and matter are in the life of man, held in immovable relation to each other. From September to December, the sun loses more and more of its light for us. This arc of the year cycle represents the downward descent of the soul into incarnation. The light of soul and of sun alike are poised in a balance with the enemy power, darkness. But it is right at this point of equal pose that the new sun has its birth. It is born at the winter solstice, figuratively, yet actually at midnight at the shortest day on December 22nd. That is, 3 days were always added by the symbolizers to typify the 3 days of or ages in the tomb of matter. Do you see that? The 3 days with Jesus also in the tomb. Part of the metaphysics here again, speaking. As the new moon is born after the 3 dark days of the cycle, so custom fixed its interval of 3 days before the consummation of the birth. Thus, we have the 25th day of December as well as the 25th of March as 2 of the great solar festival dates. So no one tells us this, folks. No one has told us this. And people are celebrating something, but they're not celebrating what is true. In fact, all this has been lost. In similar manner, the soul that went down to death in body came to its rebirth of quickening into a new cycle of growth, beginning at the evolutionary solstice when held in stable relation with flesh or matter. We have risked overstatement of these correspondence in order that no phase of the symbolism might be wanting from the picture that forms the background of the meaning of the Christ's birth in a stable. Indeed, this elaboration should by now have disclosed the secret of the hidden meaning we're at any rate ready for the announcement. With what astonishment or with what incredulity and what incredulity it may fall upon minds accustomed to regard the Bible as objective history, we cannot pause to consider. But the truth is obvious that the stable of the nativity story is nothing but a hieroglyph used by the astute ancients to convey cryptically the real meaning of the word stabilization. In quotes here, I'll say it again, stabilization. The Christ, as we have fully shown, was born and must be born out of the situation where spirit and matter, soul and body are stabilized in relation to each other. He is born in the stable condition of the two forces. He comes to birth when the two are stable in the sense of stabilized in each other's embrace. He is born in the evolutionary solstice when his two parents are locked in stable equilibration or equal pose. Sorry, I butchered that word. We hasten to assert that our claims for this interpretation of the symbol do not rest alone upon this play upon words. There are other aspects of the typology that most subtly reinforces the legitimacy of the rendering. A stable, quote from the Latin and Greek root means sta, stay, to stand, is a place, generally where animals come in to stand for the night. The very sense of stablet is that the beast can stand, stop, stay, still in stalls, in a static or inactive state or station. This again is no merely ludicrous play with words, but a disclosure of a very basic item of philosophy that lurks in our very language. The selection of the stable for this phase of the allegory was based upon knowledge of evolution possessed by the wise men of old. They knew that the animal, as in brackets here, evolution, had come to a stand at the point where the soul could be linked with it. And this was during the incarnation of the soul in the animal's body, when in stable relation with it. And incarnation, as hinted, was symbolic as the dark night of the soul. So in evolutionary terms, the animal evolution had been stable for the night. And the Christ might then be born in conjunction with the animal body. Now, I'm going to play on words here, and I'm just going to say something here, just popped in my head. Could it also mean that he's talking about stable or dark night of the soul, or to stand at a point? Could it mean also, this is my theory, could it be also stillness? Now, I don't know if that's correct or not, but I'm just saying that. So don't hold my words there. I just want to say something and see if that's, just put that out there, see what that means there. Again, a stable is a provision made for the welfare of animals by humans, and the evolutionary reference to state of stabilization was achieved for the animals through the benevolent sacrificial agency of the higher race of beings, that is, humans. The brute kingdom is elevated by the grace of mankind, as mankind, in turn, is exalted by the grace of the gods. The animals were stabilized by the beneficence influence of humanity, descending into the stable from above, as the animals enter it for the night of solstice from below. Even Jesus had enforced this meaning upon our intention when he says to his disciples, "Ye are from below, I am from above." Quote, from opposite directions, both parties had entered the stable for the night. Do you see what he's saying here? You're from below, so you're matter, and I am from above, spirit. From opposite directions, both parties had entered the stable for the night. The animals coming under human care. The human influence touched them as they stood in the stalls. Reading it in two senses, the animal race was stalled in the evolutionary stable, where men came to stand with them to birth the Christos. So this is also speaking of your animal nature and your spirit nature. You see that? You see what he's saying here? The two senses of the animal race, part of that, you being animal and also spirit, was stalled in the evolutionary stable where men and came to stand with him to birth the Christos. This significance is likewise evident in the frame of the prodigal son allegory. The nadir, the nadir of the soul descent was the place where he had reached the animal's level. Remember that in the parable when he didn't eat of the husk that the swine did eat. He got on the ground and ate because he was so hungry that he ate from the pigs' place where they ate at on the ground. He he lowered himself. He needed food to eat to stay alive. A Chinese variant to this typology has the son thrown out into the pig yard. The gospel version has the Son of God born in the stable with the animals. Later, the Christ Spirit must cleanse this habitation, the stable of the animal body, from the filth of the animal nature, and this is the meaning of the cleansing of the Argent stables by Hercules, a Greek Jesus type. Somewhat inadvertently, we have arrived by the road of this allegorism at the gate of the interpretation of another hitherto unsolved problem of Bible symbology as history. Joshua's command to the sun and moon to stand still. We talked about this last night a little bit. Until that is a Hebrew name for Jesus, the Christ, could gain the victory at Ajalon. So this is when the sun and moon stand still. Could the sun be the spirit and the moon being the matter? It is unacceptable to reason, but as allegory, it reflects the same deep sense of the identical reference as the stable figure. For here, too, we note the standing still of two forces. And when we know that sun and moon, respectively, typify just the two factors active in the birth of Christ, that is, the soul and the body, we are assured on the authority of another biblical figuration that the Christ is born as a result of the stabilization of the two. And looking again at the various features of the solstice, we give attention to another facet of the phenomenon. For a period of roughly 2 weeks, there is no momentum, the relative gain or loss of light and darkness. There is no movement in nature, so to say. The battle is at an even balance of defeat and victory. So it's like a two antagonists, pushing each other, and yet there is no victory or defeat here on either side. The antagonistic powers are in equal relation, stabilized. So there is no winner moving forward or just it's almost as though they're pushing against each other, so to speak. Let us turn now to note how vividly this motionlessness of the two at the solstice has been woven into some of the allegory depreciations. Practically every archaic scripture has represented the Christmas, in brackets, mass, M-A-S, is from the Egyptian mes, M-E-S, to be born, in brackets. Event as occurring at midnight of the solstice on December 22nd and to the 25th, but not merely the time, but also the condition of midnight was accentuated. Christ was born in the stillness of midnight. The world in solemn stillness lay to hear the angels sing. Oh my goodness, I've never even seen this. This is really critical. So the word stillness, like we are talking earlier, is speaking here now in a song. Oh, little town of Bethlehem, how still we see thee lie. End quote. But perhaps the most reverently expression the West has ever voiced an embodiment in the sentiment with which, on Christmas Eve and at midnight, the Christmas people bow singing, Holy Night, Silent Night. So again, the word silence would be stillness, you see. For the Christ is born in the motionlessness the midnight pause of evolution. That's what we're supposed to be. You see, we're supposed to be Christ, you see, and that takes place with stillness. Ancient Embryosism dramaticalizes this silence and stillness in many a legend. Fortunately, one of these scenes has been preserved for us in a writing, the claims of which is to place in the Bible itself are indispensably strong. Indeed, they may have been its open presentation of the birth of Jesus as purely spiritual drama that weighed against the document inclusions in the accredited canon of the New Testament, and one of the best of the New Testament apocryphal books. The Pro Evangelium, a gospel ascribed to James, we have a vivid dramatization of the midnight quietude rather than the ceasing of all motion in nature at the moment of the crisis of Christ's birth. Because of its importance in this interpretation, we do not apologize for quoting it in full. It is the whole of chapter 13. Quote, and leaving her, Mary, and his sons in the cave, Joseph went forth to seek a Hebrew midwife in the village of Bethlehem. 2. But as I was going, said Joseph, I looked up into the air, and I saw the clouds astonish, and the fowls of the air stopping in the midst of their flight. And I looked down towards the earth, and I saw a table spread and working people sitting around it, but their hands were upon the table and did not move to eat. 4. Verse 4. They who had meat in their mouths did not eat. They who had lifted their hands up to their heads did not draw them back. And they who lifted them up to their mouths did not put anything in. But all their faces were fixed upward. And I beheld the sheep disperse, and yet the sheep stood still. And the shepherd lifted up his hand to smite them, and his hand continued up. And verses 10 says, and I looked into a river and saw the kids with their mouths closed to the water and touching it, but did not drink. One must ask in reference to this astonishing chapter if we are not forced to take it as a let's go back to word. Forced to take it as a scene from a nativity stage production in which the pictorializing faculty had been exercised in ingenuity to devise a secret representation of the central fact of the sudden stoppage of fixation at all apparent movement between the symbols of soul and sense in the soulless season. Surely it would require a vast deal of specialist subtlety to explain it on any other ground. At any rate, we have here the very basic datum of our exegesis actually dramatized in the birth narrative. That which may at first have seemed a mere fancy of our own brain is now seen to be supported by vital consideration as well by Scripture itself. But there is still further confirmation for the conception in another field, that of ancient symbology in astronomy. Nature seems to have enacted much of the drama of human experience in the movements of the celestial orbs. Ancient discernment, coupled with the typology tendency, at any rate, trace the spiritual phenomena of our lives in the constellations, the movements of which strangely appear to write our history in the skies. Mortal man is indeed a reflection of the heavenly man, who Plato says was crucified in space. The plain spheres on this ceiling of ancient temples portray the advent or birth of the Christ on earth is an astronomical delineation in collaboration with nature's disposition of the stars. The pictographic shows the great star Sirius of the Egyptians, the symbol of deity, seen since our own sun was believed to revolve around it, standing directly on the central meridian of the heavens, having reached that point precisely at midnight of December 24th in one of the earlier periods of the precession of the equinoxes. The Egyptians dated the end and beginning of the solar year from their observations of this position of Sirius, but the great Dog Star was not alone the announcer and harbinger of the birth of the new cycle, itself symbol of the new Christ principle in the world. As it stood on the meridian at the moment of midnight, there was seen rising above the eastern horizon the constellation of the Virgin, pictured as holding in her left arm the infant Christ, and in her right a spike of wheat, figured by the great star Spica, that is Latin, a head of wheat. Here was the birth of the Christ astronomically dramatized, both in the child itself and under his principal ancient symbol, the wheat or bread. John even describes him as that bread which came down from heaven. And Jesus himself said, quote, "This loaf is my body. Take, eat," end quote. A legend of esoteric lore is to the effect that when the race of angelical spirits that were to endow humanity with the Christ nature came down to earth, they bought with them for their more suitable food wheat, the grape, and the bee for honey. Honey, bread, and wine had been, curiously enough, the three most prominent symbols of the divine life. Bee, that is, Bee, is stated by Massey to be derived from the Egyptian Ba, Ba, the soul. In many Bible narratives, there are seemingly minor points mentioned which have been ignored in the interpretation, but which, with the esoteric keys, are seen to be the most relevant to the meaning. There are two such that pertain to the birth of the Messiah at the Solus. In the parable of the wise and foolish virgins, it has hardly ever received comment that the critical hour of the bridegroom's coming is placed at midnight. Quote, "And at midnight there was a cry made, Behold, the bridegroom cometh." End quote. The bridegroom, of course, is Christ, coming to earth for his marriage with the flesh. See, the second such allusion to the solar solstice as the birth time is found in 1 Samuel 1:20. Of Elkanah, two wives, Peninnah and Hannah, the latter was childless, and like Sarah in the Abraham allegory, yearning for a son. The Lord finally answered her prayers. Quote, "So Hannah conceived, and at the turn of the year, she bore a son." End quote. When to the astrological symbolism there is added the consideration that Hannah is the same name as Anna, the legendary mother of Christ. At least there is a presumption evidence of the kindred nature of the stories. Another instance of the midnight birth is seen in the Lord smiting all the firstborn in the land of Egypt. That is, in quotes, at midnight. Egypt being a recurrent glyph for this earth or the life and body of it, the smitten of the firstborn may be taken as a reference to the sacrifice of the Christos collectively. In the sheer fact in incarnation, the phase, quote, "smitten to earth," end quote, is found in the context of the Bible, and Christ was described as the, quote, "the first fruits," end quote. It seems a bit less clear than in most cases to be a variant terminology for the sacrifice of God's firstborn son, the first emanation of the power on the cross of matter. It is useless for Orthodox protagonists to protest that such a mode of exegesis is both too subtle and too far-fetched for their acceptance. We must recognize that at least as much subtlety must be employed in the elucidation as was used in the construction of the myths. The presumption of naivety in the matter has thrown and held the West in spiritual unenlightenment for 16 centuries. It's probably now 17 centuries almost. It is time we showed ourselves at least as canny as the despised pagans of yore. An interesting sidelight is cast upon our understanding of a proper term in the Bible from the data of this lecture. The new cycle, that is the new Son of the Father, God, is born, as we have seen, end quote, at the turn of the year, end quote. It is at the point where the prodigal son turns from the old and dying face of his nature to begin a new growth. It is where from a animus engrossment he turns to return to his Father in spirit. Now the Hebrew term in the Bible that specifies this exact position is Sinai. It is derived from the Egyptian Shini or Sinai, which means point of turning and returning, end quote. This is of great value in indicating to us at last that the communion of Moses with the Eternal on Mount Sinai is esoterically our communion with God within our own natures right here on this earth. We are on Mount Sinai now because we are standing at that evolutionary point of turning where we are in stable relation with matter, the only condition under which soul and body can commune with each other. And I'm going to take a break at this point in the book. Um, so let's get back to where we were at. This is a little over an hour done here. Oh, I see you. Hello, slightly slanted salute for the truth. I've been reading here from a particular book here from Mr. Kuhn, and I've been doing a couple of them today since I had the day off, so I thought I'd share that. Good to see you. Hope you're doing well. That's possibly I used must have spoke to me about 45 minutes ago, but it's good to see you, Slide and Slant and Sleep. Hope you're doing okay, and wish you the best. At this point, I'm going to take a break. Again, this was the Stable and the Manger by Alvin Boyd Kuhn from his book that I've been reading off of the internet today. Thank you for being here, and we'll try to get the second part maybe done this evening if I've got the energy to do it, so to speak. Thank you again for being here, and wish you a good day. Take care.